We're on DAF Kuf Hey Amud Aleph, and the Mishnah had brought a machlokes between Rabbi Yehoshua ben Beseira and the Chachamim. If your kasav os echas no trikon, that if you write one letter, which is an abbreviation for a full word, let's say the letter Hey with an apostrophe, does that may count as writing a word to make you chayev or not? So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Beseira mechayev, v'Chachamim potrin. That's the machlokas. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra minayin lelashon no trikon min haTorah. This is an agadata now, but it's related to our discussion. How do you know that there's a concept of abbreviation in the Torah, where the Torah will sometimes have a letter stand for a full word, and also to break down a word into its individual letters, where each letter stands for a separate word? How do you know that this is a concept that is real in the eyes of the Torah? Shene'amar ki av hamon goyim nesaticha, that Hashem tells Avraham that I am making you into a father of the masses of the nations. And Av Hamon, actually those 6 letters form an abbreviation for the following. That Av Nisaticha, Le'umos, that I have made you into an Av for the nations, that's the letter Aleph. Bachur Nisaticha Ba'umos, I have made you into the chosen among the nations. Hamon Chaviv Nisaticha Ba'umos, the letter Hey stands for a populace that is beloved. I have made you among the nations. Melech, that's the Mem, Nisaticha Ba'umos, I've made you a king over the nations. Vasik Nisaticha Ba'umos, I've made you into a Vasikin, the aged or distinguished. I guess distinguished would be in this case. And Neman Nisaticha La'umos, I have made you someone trustworthy among the Umos, faithful among the Umos. Now, basically, all the Gemara is saying is that we can find significance in these 6 letters to stand for other things. That's really all the Gemara is saying, is that this exercise is of value because encoded within the words of Torah are sometimes no trikon. Rabbi Yochanan Didei Omar, Anochi, Rabbi Yochanan himself says that the word Anochi, the first word of the Aseres Hadibros, is also a no trikon. Ana nafshi kasivas yahavis, that I, my own soul, says God, I myself have written the luchos and have given them to you, which is a very important part of our foundational belief that HaKadosh Baruch Hu inserted himself into the physical world to interface with the Jewish people and to give them the Torah. Rabbanan Amri, Amira Ne'ima Ksiva Yehiva. The Chachamim say that what Anochi stands for is a pleasant speech that was written and that was given. Ika da Amri Anochi Lamafreya, that you can read Anochi even backwards and get a significant no trikon, and that is Yehiva Ksiva Ne'emonim Amre, that which is given, that writing which is given, is the content of that writing is faithful. Devei Rabbi Nasan Amri Ki Arata Derech Lenegdi, that the angel, when speaking to Bilam and chastising him and saying, why did you hit your donkey? He says that the donkey turned aside because it saw me. So the word yarat, turned aside, also can be a no trikon of yud resh tes, yara ro'a sanatza, that the animal was fearful when it saw and then it turned to the side. Devei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, Carmel, the Torah, in describing the law of the Korban HaOmer, tells us the word Carmel. You shall bring it at a time when the wheat or the grain is at its point of Carmel. So Carmel is a certain point of where the wheat is or the grain is very moist. And so what does it stand for? Carmele. It's like a cushion which is full, meaning it's filled with moisture. It's a soft kernel, like a cushion that's filled with moisture. So that's the way to tell that it's the time to bring the Korban HaOmer. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar, V'hu kilolani mretzes, that David HaMelech on his deathbed says to take revenge upon Shimi ben Gera, and over there he says to his son Shlomo that he cursed me with a vexing curse. The word nimretzes stands for, there's those 5 letters, no trikon, no efu. David was saying that Shimi was an adulterer, Moavihu, he's a Moabite. Rotseachu, he's a murderer. Sorerhu, he is one who conspires to mutiny. And Toeva, he's an abomination. So this is all embedded in the word Nimreses. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar, Ma nedaber uma nitzdadok. The brothers say to Yosef, what can we say and how can we justify ourselves? The 5 letters of Nitzdadok are a notricon for the following 5 things. Nechonim anachnu, tzadikim anachnu, tahorim anachnu, dachim anachnu, and kedoshim anachnu. That we are correct, we are righteous, we are pure, we are humble, and we are holy. Meaning that even embedded within their statement of what can we say, there really is what they can say. But they were humbling themselves before Yosef. This is all Agadata. The purpose of this exercise is to say that there is value in finding embedded, encoded messages within the abbreviated words of the Torah. Okay? Let us go weiter. The Mishnah says, HaKosef bezosios b'shtei ha'alamos, echa shachris v'echas bein ha'arboyim, that if a person writes 2 letters over Shabbos, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and he has an awareness in between that it's usher for him to write and that today is Shabbos, so Rabbi Gamliel mechayev v'chachamim potrim. Rabbi Gamliel says you're still chayiv because you can conjoin those 2 letters together, the writing of those 2 letters to make you chayiv, to have the minimal share of the writing of 2 letters. And the chachamim say you're patur because you have knowledge in between. The Gemara asks the Maikam Iflagi, what's the machlokas? Rabbi Gamliel savar ein yediyah lechatzi shir, v'Rabbanan savar yesh yediyah lechatzi shir. This machlokas has been noted elsewhere in Masechah Shabbos. We've seen it before. And essentially the machlokas is as follows. We know that in order to be chayiv one carbon for multiple acts, it has to be done behelam echad. It has to be done without knowledge in between the 2 acts. However, what if you've only done a half of an act? Meaning that the Torah says that in order for an act to be significant, it has to be a certain shear. For example, if you eat a half a kazayas of chaylev, and then you have knowledge in the interim, and then you eat another half a kazayas of chaylev, is that knowledge significant enough to divide those two eatings? The Chachamim say yes, because knowledge always divides 2 actions. Awareness always divides 2 actions. And Rabbi Gamliel says no, awareness only divides 2 complete actions, 2 full actions. You have to eat 1 kazayas and then another kazayas and have knowledge in between, then you're going to be chayiv 2 karbanos. But if you eat a half a kazayas and then have awareness and then have another half a kazayas, that awareness does not divide between the 2 half acts, and therefore they're conjoinable. That's according to Rabbi Gamliel. We go like the Chachamim. Hadran Allah Chaboyna. We're now going into the laws of weaving and sewing and stitching, and this requires knowledge of the structure of a loom. And we're not. It's useful when you're learning this parak to have a diagram of a loom, and at least to understand the basic operation of how a loom works. I'm going to explain this to you now in very, very abbreviated form. A loom is comprised of 2 different kinds of threads, the warp thread and the woof thread. And I'll tell you, that's called the shesi and the erev. All right? Now, you have, in generally speaking, we're talking about a horizontal loom where the thread is lying flat. That's your warp thread, is lying flat, and the threads are lying one next to each other, stretched out, and attached to the 2 ends of the loom, which are usually wooden bars. These 2 wooden bars are held, and they, in turn, hold the threads in place of the warp. Okay, that's the warp. Now, how do we do a weave? We do a weave by taking our woof thread, which is the thread that goes crisscross over the warp thread, and we go one under, and then the next thread we go over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, until we get to the other side of the warp that we're working with, and that's how we create one row of a weave. Okay? Now, how does that work in a loom where the purpose of the loom is to automate the process? The purpose of a loom that the Gemara is talking about, that exists, the technology in the time of the Gemara, is such that there is something called something with a K, I forget the word. It's an apparatus that is operated by a pulley that is above the loom. And the purpose of this apparatus, it's basically two squares, two wooden frames that have loops suspended in these wooden frames. And the purpose of these wooden frames is that you have frame A and frame B. And when frame A is up, frame B goes down. And when frame B goes up, frame A goes down. They're attached by a string with a pulley, so that you generally can control it with a foot pedal. And this was the technology that was known in the Gemara. Now, what is the purpose of this? Someone yell out the name. I forgot the term. The purpose of these two wooden frames with the loops in it is that every single thread that is along the warp is threaded through the loops that are contained in these two wooden frames. And the way that you would do it is as follows. If you've got all your threads running across the loom, you take thread 1 and you put it through frame A, the one loop in frame A, and then you attach it to the other side of the loom. That's the first thread of the warp.
The heddle?
The heddle. That's what it's called. It's called a heddle. Right? It's called a heddle. I thought it was with a K, but it's with an H. It's with a heddle. Okay. Then you've got thread 2. And you take thread 2 and you put it through a loop in frame B of the heddle. And you alternate. Thread 1 goes through a loop in frame A. Thread 2 goes through a loop in frame B. Thread 3 goes through a loop in frame A again. And thread 4 goes through a loop in frame B again. And you alternate. So what's the benefit of this? When you press down on the pedal and you alternate and you cause frame A to go up and frame B to go down, you're also causing every other thread to go up and every other thread to go down. And this creates a gap vertically between half the threads. Every other thread now is separated. And what's the benefit? Now you can take your chassis thread, your woof thread, and the way to remember the word woof is that woof is what the sound that a dog makes when it's running. So this is the thread that moves. It runs back and forth in between the warp thread. This is what's called the Erev thread in Hebrew. And you take this Erev thread that's on a spindle, which is what we call the buchiar in the Gemara terminology, and you pass or you throw it through that gap that was created by the heddle. Okay, the heddle apparatus that's above the loom. And then you throw that spindle of wool or thread across to the other side. Then you press on the pedal again, and the heddle switches positions. So what the threads that were up are now down, and the threads that were down are now up, because frame A and frame B have switched positions. And then you throw your buchiar, your spindle of woof thread, across to the other side. And then you press on the pedal again, and it switches, and it goes back and forth. And that's how you weave. That's the weaving process using the technology that existed in the times of the Gemara.
And that's about putting your pedal to the heddle.
Put the pedal to the heddle. That's very good. Very good.
The rod that moves the heddle is the kona, so that's what the Rabbi thinks with the...
Well, no, there are different ways of operating the heddle. So the Gemara talks about a pedal on the floor, but there are other ways of operating. You can operate it with your hands sometimes also. Now, there are other parts to a loom, which we're going to discuss momentarily, which we're not going to have time to go into, and I didn't even bother researching all the different components. There's another component to the loom, which after you press on the pedal, there's also like a bar or a hook that compresses the woof thread back towards one end of the loom to be able to compress the weave so that it doesn't unravel. And there are other components as well that you have to be a real mumche in order to understand what each component is for. There's one component that threads carefully the thread so it doesn't become entangled and all. So all of these other things exist in the loom. But we have the basic principle. Now, why is this important? Because those loops that are in the heddle, those two wooden frames of the heddle, those loops are called batei nirin. So ha'osa shnei batei nirin is one of the 39 malachas. That if you thread two loops on Shabbos, you're doing a malacha. So now let's take a look at the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer.
They had a loom in the desert, or
They had some kind of loom instrument in the desert. It was probably not as technologically advanced as the Mishnah's loom, but it was some kind of loom. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer Ha'orik, because it's not that difficult to make a loom. You can make one in your home. It's very, you can make, doesn't have to have necessarily a pedal with pulleys and things like that. There has to be some kind of pulley system, but it doesn't have to be that technologically advanced. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Ha'orik Shlosha Chutin Batchila Ve'echas Al Ha'orik Chayt. So Rabbi Eliezer is the first opinion that we see, and he states as follows: that how many woof rows do you have to create in order to be considered doing a malacha? So it depends. If you've just set up your loom and all you have is warp thread and you haven't even begun inserting the woof thread yet, so you have to insert 3 rows, back, forth, back, in order to have done a malacha. But if you've already got some woof threads already in the weave, then just adding 1 row makes you chayiv. That's according to Rabbi Eliezer. And the Chachamim say no. It doesn't matter whether you're starting anew or whether you're adding rows to an existent weave. 2 rows back and forth is what makes you liable. If you thread 2 loops of the heddle together with the nirin, the kiros, the nafe, the kavara, or the sal, which are different other apparatuses that exist on a loom, so then you've done a malacha and you're going to be chayiv. The Gemara will explain some of these. And bahatofer based tefiros, now that's the weaving process. Related to that is sewing or stitching. And the Mishnah now says that stitching is done with a needle. Of course, weaving is not done with a needle. Hatofer based tefiros, if a person makes 2 stitches with the needle on Shabbos, or vahakorea almanas litfor based tefiros, or if a person tears with the intention of making 2 stitchings in the place of that tear, so then he's done a malacha and he's going to be chayav a korban. The Gemara now says, Ki asa Rabbi Yitzchak Tani Shtayim, that when Rabbi Yitzchak came along, he taught, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that if you're starting your weave for the first time on the woof, you only have to create 2 rows. Frek the Gemara V'ha'anan Tanan Gimel. But doesn't our Mishnah say 3 rows, not 2? Answers the Gemara, Lokasha haba alimi habikatini. It depends on whether you're using thick thread or thin thread. Amri lo lahagisa, v'amri lo lahagisa. So the question is, well, which one is it? Is the thick thread the one that requires 3 and the thin thread requires 2, or vice versa? So you have 2 different opinions. Amri lo lahagisa alimi tlasa lo sasri, tre sasri, katini tre nami lo sasri. So some are of the opinion that in order to be liable, when you're using thick thread, you need to have 3 rows. The reason is because thick thread is more coarse, it more easily unravels. So therefore, in order to be liable for the malacha of weaving, you have to insert woof rows that are not going to be easily unraveled, and that's when you've done the malacha. So 3 rows is what you need to start the weave with in order for it not to be unravelable. And therefore, when you're using thick thread, because it's more coarse and more given to unraveling, you need 3 rows. But when you're using thin thread, which is more compressible and therefore less likely to unravel, you only need to start with 2 rows. Va'amri lo lahai gisa. Others learn it just the opposite. That katini talasa yadi'i, tre lo yadi'i, alimi tre nami yadi'i. That it's not got nothing to do with the unravelability, but rather with the visibility of the weave. That with 2 strings, when you're dealing with a thin thread, 2 rows of woof are just not visible as being a real significant weave, and therefore when you're using thin thread, you need to start with 3 rows in order to be liable, because otherwise it's not even a visible weave. With thick thread, however, even if you do just 2 rows, that's visible, that's a significant weave, and you'll be chayav with just 2 rows. So those are 2 ways of approaching the difference between the Mishnah and the Brisa. Tanya, let's look at another Brisa. Ha'orei gimel chutin batechila ve'echad al ha'orei chayav, that if a person weaves, if he starts a weave for the first time on the woof, then in order to be liable, he needs to add 3 rows of woof. But if he's adding to an existent weave, he just needs to add 1 row. So who does that Brisa go like? That Brisa clearly goes like Rabbi Eliezer of our Mishnah. V'chachamim omrim bein batchila bein basof shiurin beis chutin. And the Chachamim disagree, and they say whether you're starting a woof weave or whether you're adding to an existent weave, you have to always add 2 rows in order to be chayav. Uvasafa, and then the Brisa adds another piece of information. Let's say you're making a hem to a garment. Now, in order to create a hem, you typically use a different kind of fabric or a different kind of weave to create the hem because it's almost like a separate piece of material. So therefore, you need beis chutin barochav gimel batei nirin. Therefore, even though normally, and here we're getting into the length of the woof. Up until now, we haven't been discussing how long the row of the woof is. We just said how many rows you need. Do you need 1 row? Do you need 3 rows? Do you need 2 rows? But how long is that row? So we're going to see when we turn the page that it's not very long at all. It's about maybe 4 or 5 inches long is going to be the length of the woof row in order to be considered to be a significant row of weave. However, if you're creating a hem, then since that's considered to be a separate piece of material, then the length of that hem has to be a little bit longer than that in order for it to be considered to be a malacha. So first of all, its width has to be 2 rows of thread weave. And how long must it be? It has to be gimel batei nirin. It has to be the length of 3 heddle loops, which is a little bit longer than the 5 inches that I mentioned to you before. Now, halamazeh dome, and the reason why it has to be longer in order for it to be a malacha is because it's like la'orik tziltzul katan beis chutin barochav gimel batei nirin, is because a hem is considered to be a separate piece of material. It's like when you create a small little belt made out of fabric, in order for it to have any chashivas, it has to be at least 2 rows of weave, plus it has to have the length of 3 heddle loops. Okay, the Brisa then, so the Gemara now says, let's go back to the beginning of that Brisa. Ha'oreg gimel chutin batchila v'echad al ha'oreg chayav. That first line of that Brisa had said that if you start the weave for the first time, you need 3 rows, and if you're adding to weave, you need 1 row. So stama ke Rabbi Eliezer. So you see that Brisa goes according to Rabbi Eliezer, even though there's no attribution given to anyone. It's an anonymous Mishnah. Now Tanya Idach. Now let's look at another Brisa which has a different position. It says ha'oreg beis chutin al hagas ve'al ha'imra chayiv. It says that if a person adds 2 rows to a weave, regardless of whether this is al-hagas, which Rashi explains al-hagas means that you've already got an existent weave, or al-ha'imra, that you're starting the edge of the garment for the first time, which means you're beginning the weave. Either way, if you add 2 rows, you're going to be chayiv. So who does that go like? That goes like the Chachamim of our Mishnah. Okay, and Rabbi Eliezer Omer afilu echad. And Rabbi Eliezer says that if you're adding to an existent weave, all you need to do is add 1 row in order to be chayiv. Uvasafa shnei chutin barochav shlosha batei nirin chayiv halamaz edaim elarik tziltzul katan shnei chutin arochav gimel batei nirin. And then this Brisa says the exact same thing that the previous Brisa says, that when you're making a separate hem for the garment, since it's considered to be a separate piece of fabric, it has to be longer. It has to be 2 rows of weave, plus its length has to be the length of 3 heddle loops, which is a little bit longer than the normal shear because it's such a small piece of fabric. So in order for it to acquire its chashivas, it has to be a little bit longer. So the Gemara now says, ha'oreg beis chutin al hagas ve'al ha'imra chayav, that first line of the Brisa, which says that whether you're starting a new weave or whether you're adding to an existent weave, you need to have 2 rows in order to be chayav. Stama ke Rabbanan. That Brisa clearly, even though it's authored anonymously, goes according to the Chachamim. So therefore, the whole point of this exercise was to show you that we have 2 Brisas, both authored anonymously. One goes according to Rabbi Eliezer, and one goes according to the Chachamim. Let us go weiter. Ha'osa beis batei nirin chulei. If a person threads 2 heddle loops on Shabbos, he's chayiv. But then the Mishnah says that you have to do it binirin or bikiros or binafe bikavara uvesal. So there's different ways of interpreting that, and some of the Meforshim learn is that you do it together with threading a nir or a kiros or a nafa or a kavara or a sal. But again, this is very ambiguous, and unless we know loom technology, it's very difficult to understand exactly what the Mishnah is describing. So the Gemara's first question is, my benirin. What does it mean that you thread the two loops together with nirin? So Amar Abaye tarti bebate nira v'chada benira. So it means, says Abaye, that you're doing three acts. You're doing two threadings through the heddle loops, plus you're doing one threading through something called a nira, which Rashi explains is a certain kind of hook apparatus that's together with the loom that compresses the woof thread towards one end of the loom. Like I said, that's one of the pieces of a loom that is used when you press down on the pedal. This apparatus compresses the woof thread so that you'll have a tight weave. So you have to thread your thread through that as well, together with threading it through the two loops, in order to do a full malacha of threading through the loom apparatus on Shabbos. And bekiros, the Gemara says, my bekiros, amarav mitzuvisa. What is a mitzuvisa? Rashi explains that's the apparatus that is used to move the heddle, the frame A and the frame B of the heddle up and down, requires some threading through that pedal as well. And if you do that together with threading through the heddle loops, that too will make you chayiv. So we're not, and then you have these other things that are mentioned in the Mishnah, which are a kavara and a sal. These are two other, one's a sieve and one's a basket. So according to the way that Rashi seems to be learning is that in order to make you liable, it's not just enough to thread the two heddle loops, but you have to do it in conjunction with threading through one other item that's in the loom, and these are the other items that are part of the loom that are needed in order to make you chayiv. Next, let's go on to tefira, because we've learned that we're going loomy over this loom. Okay, v'hatofer beis tefiros. If a person stitches two stitches on Shabbos, he's chayiv. So hatanina ba'avos malachos hatofer beis tefiros. So the Gemara's question is, why are you repeating yourself? We learned in the 7th parak when we enumerated the 39 malachos, a person who stitches two stitches. Why do you have to say it again over here in the 13th parak? So the Gemara answers, mishum dekaboy lemisna seifa v'akareya almanas litfor beis tefiros. Because the Seifa says that if you tear, the amount of tearing in order to make you liable is the amount that would be needed in order to make two stitches in the place of the tear. So the Gemara says, but Katani Nami Atofer Vahakoreya, but that too was enumerated in the 7th parak. So why are you repeating it over here? So Hanami Tanina Ba'avos Malachos, that's also enumerated. So Elamishum de Kaboy Lemisna Seifa, but rather when we turn the page, we're going to see the next part of the Mishnah, which talks about another kind of tearing for which you are potter, and that is Hakareya Bachamaso Ve'almeso Mishamachi Katani Hatofer Shtei Tfiros. Because the next Mishnah is going to tell us that there's a certain kind of tearing that when you tear not for constructive purposes, but when you tear for destructive purposes, then you're going to be potter. So because we wanted to talk about tearing for destructive purposes being potter, we also talked about stitching and tearing for stitching, which is constructive, just to create a contrast, even though we've already listed it before. Next, if a person tears in order to be able to stitch over the tear two stitches, so why would a person ever do that, says the Gemara? Because many times, if you're in the middle of stitching or sewing, you sometimes botch it such that you create a concave indentation in the fabric that you're working with, like a pocket, when you really didn't mean to make that bunching up of the fabric. So you have to tear it and start all over again. So how much do you have to tear? Enough so that when you want to rejoin the pieces that you tore, you make two stitches. Okay, that's what the Mishnah means. Let's go on to the next Gemara. Hakoreya b'chamaso ve'almeso v'chol hamekalkel in peturin. That if a person tears out of anger, he just says, "Oi, I'm so angry," and he rips his clothes. Or if a person is distraught because he's just suffered a death in his family, so then if he tears his clothes, in those cases you're putter. V'hamakalkel amanas l'takein shi'uro kimisakein. That when it comes to being destructive, which has a constructive out objective. So, for example, let's say I do a destructive act, but as a result of that destructive act, I can do something constructive in its wake. So then, how much of what is the shear of that destructive act in order to make me chayiv. I destroy so much that in its wake I can do a malacha of construction for which I'm going to be chayiv. So the example that we gave before is that if you tear, you have to tear so much that you can do 2 stitches in the wake of that tear. That's what's going to make you chayiv. And the Mishnah is therefore just telling us that that's the general rule for other malachas as well. Now, shir hamalabein v'hamenafetz v'hatzoveya v'hatoiveh, that there are other things that you do with fabric. You launder fabric, you untangle fabric, you dye fabric, and you spin wool or cotton and things like that to make it into thread. What's the shear in order to make you chayiv? Rochav hasit kaful. So the length of that is hasit kaful, a double seat. Now, how much is a seat? So Rashi says it's the distance between your index finger and your middle finger. That forms a V. So if you take the distance between the index finger and the middle finger and you double it, that's the length of material that you have to be working with, or thread that you have to be working with, that you're laundering or dyeing in order for you to be chayiv for those malachas. Now, v'ha'orek shnei chutin shi'uro kimalo hasit. If, however, you're just weaving 2 threads, right, and we said, according to the Chachamim, just adding 2 rows of woof makes you chayiv, what is the length of each of those woof threads? When you add those 2 rows, how long is each row? So the Gemara, the Mishnah says, just the distance, which is actually probably just like 1.5 inches, between the index finger and the middle finger, that's how long the row has to be in order for you to be chayiv. And that's why it said that when you're working with a hem, it has to be a little bit longer than that because it's a much smaller piece of material, and therefore it's not going to be as significant unless it's a little bit longer. And the shear that the Mishnah given previously was the length of 3 heddle loops, which I don't have no idea how much that is because I don't know loom technology. The Gemara now says, Uraminu, how can you tell me, you the Mishnah, how can you tell me that if you tear in your anger or for out of bereavement that you're going to be patur? We have another brisa that says hakoreya b'chamasa, that if you tear out of anger uva avelo va'almeso chayev, or if you're mourning over a decedent, so then you're going to be chayev. So the afal pi shemachalal es hashabbos yatzedei kriya. And then furthermore, the brisa says that if you're tearing in order to do kriya on your clothing because you're an avel, even though you did it on Shabbos, the Eved, you were yotzei the mitzvah of kriya. Even though you were mechalal Shabbos in the process, you were b'di'evet, you don't have to do another kriya after Shabbos. So the Gemara says, but you see from here that you're chayiv for actually doing an act of tearing when it says in our Mishnah that you're patur. So how do you reconcile that? Lo kasha, hab b'meis day, hab b'meis alma. When we talk about tearing kriya for bereavement over the dead, it depends. Is it your family or is it someone else's family? If it's your family, in which case you have a chiyuv, you have a mitzvah of kriya, so then you're doing a constructive act, and therefore you're going to be chayiv for doing a malacha, because it's an act of construction, because you're fulfilling an obligation in that course. But if you're tearing your clothes for someone else's family, for someone else's death, so since you have no chiyuv to do kriya, it's not considered a constructive act, it's purely destructive, and therefore you're going to be patur. So, frak the Gemara v'hameso ketana. How can you say that our Mishnah is talking about someone else's decedent? It says very explicitly in our Mishnah that it's your decedent, it's your bereaved. So the Gemara answers la'olam b'meis didei u'v'hanach lav b'nei avelos ninu. So you have to explain that no, both the Mishnah and the Bryce are members of your family, but there's cousins and then there's siblings, right? So for a sibling that you're chayiv to do kriya, so then you'll be chayiv if you do kriya. But for a cousin who's a member of your family, you do kriya. Since you're patur, you're not chayiv to do kriya. It's just a shiva for that person. So then you're going to be patur. But the Gemara says, but wait a minute. Even if he's not a close relative, you're still going to be chayiv if that person was a Talmud Chacham, because the Tanya Chacham Shemeis Hakol Krovav. The Brisa says that if a wise man dies, then everyone is his relative. Hakol Krovav Salkadaitach. What is that supposed to mean? I'm not related to that guy. So Ela Ema Hakol Kikarovav and Hakol Koran Alav, Hakol Cholzin Alav, Hakol Mavrin Alav Berachba. And what it means is that everyone has to comport themselves as a relative, and so therefore whatever a relative would do for that decedent, so too does the whole community have to do. And therefore everyone tears kriya, everyone has to expose their shoulder because their clothes are shorn, everyone has to have a Sudas Havra'ah, and the minhag was to have the Sudas Havra'ah out in the street, which was public property. The point is that everyone has to display the laws of mourning for a Talmud Chacham. So there too, it seems to contradict our Mishnah, which says that you're potter because you're not doing a constructive act. So the Gemara says, Lo tzricha d'lav chachamus. The answer is that our Mishnah is talking about where the person that you're tearing kriya for was not a Talmud Chacham, and therefore you're not doing anything constructive. But still, says the Gemara, even if a person's not a Chacham, but just as long as he's a righteous person, you still have an obligation to do kriya. D'Tanya, mipnei ma meisim banav u'v'nosav shel adam kisheim ketanim, kidei sheyifka v'yis'abel al adam kosher. It's a very, very bizarre statement. The Brisa says, why is it that Nebuch, Rachmana litzlan, a person loses his children during his lifetime when the children are young? Rachmana litzlan, no one should ever know of such a thing. But why does that happen? The answer is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants that person to be able to cry over the death of a righteous person. So he sensitizes that individual and fills his life with sadness and pain so that when the righteous person dies, he'll be able to cry properly. So the Gemara says, how can you say such a thing? Kidei sheyivke ervona shakli minei? Question mark. What do you mean? God is subjecting a person to suffering so that even before he's done anything wrong and he doesn't deserve the suffering so that in the future he'll be able to cry properly? How can, that's not justice, that's not divine justice. How can HaKadosh Baruch Hu act that way? Rather, says the Gemara, Ela mipnei shelo bacha v'his'abel al adam kasher, but rather no. Rather it's a rectification for past misdeeds. If a person did not cry properly because he couldn't muster the proper sensitivity, then, and there was a righteous person in his community that died, and the person did not mourn and cry properly, so then what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu subjects an individual to personal pain of losing a child so that that person will develop a sensitivity to death, so in order to rectify the past misdeed of not crying properly for a righteous person. And as the Brisa concludes, that anyone who cries over a righteous person is forgiven for all his sins because he's shown proper respect for the righteous decedent. So here too the Gemara says, how can our Mishnah say that there's nothing constructive in doing kriya, and therefore you're pater if for a righteous person it's very constructive? The Gemara answers, Lo tzricha d'lav adam kasher. It's not a problem. Our Mishnah is talking about where you're tearing kriya for a person who's neither a chacham nor is he a righteous person. But still, says the Gemara, even if he's not righteous and he's not wise, but if you're present at the time when the person passes away, you still have an obligation to do kriya. The Tanya, Rishon ben Elazar Omer, Ha'omed al hameis b'shas yitzias neshama chayiv l'kroa. That is, the Brisa says that if you're present at the time of death, then you have to tear kriya as the neshama departs. And halamazah doma Sefer Torah shenisrafa. It's like a Sefer Torah that's burning in front of your eyes, where the letters are being incinerated, and therefore you have to show a sense of mourning because you see that something holy is departing from this world. So the same thing, when you see a neshama departing from this world, you have to tear kriya. So the Gemara says, Lo tzricha lo koi b'shas yitzias neshama. So here too you have to say that our Mishnah is talking about an instance where you're tearing kriya when you were not present at the time of Yitzias Neshama, when the person passed away, and therefore there's no obligation whatsoever for you to do kriya. And there, in that instance, when you tear kriya, there the Mishnah says that it's a deconstructive act, not a constructive act, and therefore you're going to be pater. So Teinach Meso, Ela Chamaso Achamaso Kasha. So the Gemara says, okay, fine, you've reconciled the Mishnah and the Brisa in a case of where you're tearing for a mace, for a decedent. But the Mishnah and the Brisa also contradict each other because our Mishnah says that if you tear out of anger, you're pater, and the Brisa says if you tear out of anger, you're chayiv. So how do you reconcile that? So Chamaso Achamaso Nami Lo Kasha, Harab Yehuda, Harab Shimon. So the Gemara says you have to say it's a machlokas tanoi. That our Mishnah goes according to Reb Shimon, and the Brisa goes according to Reb Yehuda. Now Rashi points out that once you give this answer, you can say the same answer applies to the case of death as well, and you don't have to say that we're talking about two different kinds of death. But the point is that we didn't want to come on to this answer because it's less than desirable to say that there's a machlokas between the Mishnah and the Brisa. But once we get pushed into a corner, we have no other option. This is the answer that we resort to. Because why? So what's the machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon? Rabbi Yehuda the Amar malacha shein tzricha legufa chayiv aleha. Rabbi Shimon the malacha shein tzricha legufa pater aleha. So the Gemara says as follows: what is a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa? When I do a malacha without the objective of that malacha. So, for example, I do an act of plowing without the objective of planting afterwards. Or, in this instance, I tear without the objective of doing some kind of sewing or stitching up afterwards. So there, Rabbi Yehuda says you're always going to be chayiv. Even when you're doing a destructive act, you're going to be chayiv. And Rabbi Shimon says no. Since you're doing an act which is a malacha, but it's not with the intended objective of that or outcome of that malacha, you're going to be potter. And therefore, when our Mishnah says that if a person tears out of anger, since it's got no constructive outcome, you're going to be potter according to Reb Shimon, but according to Reb Yehuda, even for that you're going to be chayiv. So the Gemara now says, Emer d'shamas le Reb Yehuda b'mesakein b'mekalkel mishamas le. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute. We know that Reb Yehuda says that when you do a malacha for not the normal desired outcome, you're going to be chayiv. But maybe Rabbi Yehuda only says that if at least the non-normative outcome that you have in mind is for some productive or constructive use. But here, there's no constructive outcome when you tear out of anger. So maybe Rabbi Yehuda will also hold your putter. So the Gemara answers no. Amar Rabbi Abin hainami misakenu dekavid nachas ruach liyitzra. So Rabbi Abin says, no, what are you talking about? When you tear out of anger, that's also constructive. How is it constructive? Because you get it out of your system. Get your aggression out of your system. You appease your Yetzer Hara.
It's cathartic.
It's catharsis, exactly. So uchahai gavna mishari. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute. Since when is it permitted to do that? The Hatanya, you're sort of like feeding your Yetzer Hara. Is that really permitted? Behatanya Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishum Chilfa Bar Igra Shomer Mishum Reb Yochanan ben Nuri Hamakareya Begodav B'Chamaso V'Hamashaber Kelav B'Chamaso V'Hamafazer Mosav B'Chamaso Yehei Be'enecha Ka'oved Avodah Zarah. That if a person tears his clothing in anger, or if he breaks a utensil in anger, you ever see someone take their cell phone and throw it against the wall out of frustration? We should all do that. Anyway, V'Hamafazer Mosav B'Chamaso, if a person just tosses out his money in a fit of frustration, like he's in Vegas, and every time he plays he loses another game, so he just says, the heck with it, and he just throws out all of his money. In all of these cases, this person is like a person committing an act of idolatry. This is sinful. It's a great sin. Shekachum naso shel Yetzer Hara, because this is the technique of the Yetzer Hara. Hayom omer lo asekach. Today he gets you to do a small thing, like just feed your rage. And then ulamacher omer lo asekach, and then next day he'll say, come on, do a little bit more, be a little bit more violent. Ad she'omer lo avodah zara v'holech v'oved. Until finally he gets you to say, well, what the heck, the whole world, there's no purpose in any of this stuff anymore, and he gets you eventually to be oved avodah zara. So therefore, how can you feed the Yetzer Hara? By feeding the Yetzer Hara, you're just giving in, you're just succumbing to it, and eventually you're going to end up being oved avodah zara. So how can you say that this is something constructive? So Amar Rabbi Abin, my kara'a lo yihiyeh b'cha. So Rabbi Abin says, I'll even support this with a pasuk. What does the pasuk mean when it says lo yihiyeh b'cha el zar v'lo sishtachaveh el nechor? The Torah says there may not be within you a foreign or a strange god, nor may you bow down to a foreign god. So ezehu el zar sheyesh begufo shel adam. What does the Torah mean when it says there may not be within you a strange god? What does it mean within you, a strange god? So it's something within you that is strange or that is foreign. And the Omer say Yetzer Hara, that it says you're not supposed to give in or succumb to your Yetzer Hara. And that's the pasuk which tells us that it's wrong to act upon your anger. So the Gemara says, Lo tzricha deka'avid l'mirma emasa in shebeise. So the Gemara answers no. When our Brisa says that there's something constructive, or when Rabbi Yehuda says that there's something constructive to breaking something out of anger, he's not talking about where you break it in anger stam to be able to appease your anger, to abate your anger, but rather he's saying where you're in control. You're totally in control of your emotions, and you break an object to demonstrate anger to the members of your household. It's almost like they say when you want to discipline a dog, you take a roll up a newspaper, and instead of hitting the dog, you hit the ground. And the dog gets scared because he sees how upset you are. So that's the same principle that the Gemara is explaining now, is that sometimes you can justify breaking things in your house to show your children or the other members of your household how upset you are. And that will instill them with a sense of fear, and they'll behave better. So you come home one day, and the kids are throwing spaghetti on the walls, and your wife is having a meltdown, and you don't know what to do. So that's when you can justify breaking something in order to restore some sense of normalcy and decorum into your household. Kihada Rav Yehuda Shalif, I'm just making up these stories. Kihada Rav Yehuda Shalif Matzbiyasa. That Rav Yehuda, what did he used to do? He used to tear like the hem of his garment in order to show that he was upset. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Tavar Monei Taviri. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov used to take broken shards and would break them further to show he was upset. And Rav Sheshes Rami Lo La'amse Manina Aresha. He used to take the fish brine and pour it on the head of his maid. I don't know why he would do that. Maybe she didn't make good herring. I don't know why. I don't know under what circumstances that would be permitted. It's difficult for me to understand that. Anyway, Rabbi Abba Tavar Nachtima, and Rabbi Abba took a jar lid and he would break it. And Abraham Shimon ben Pazi, Amr Yeshua ben Levi, Mishum bar Kapara, Kol Hamori Demos Al Adam Kosher. Now we go back to this discussion of mourning over a righteous person. Anyone who sheds tears over a righteous person, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sofer Menichem Beveis Genazav, that Hashem counts those tears and places them in His treasury. Shenamar Nodisa Farta, that my flask you have counted, Ata Sima Dimasi, you Hashem place my tears, Benotcha, in your flask. Halo b'sifrasecha, it is in your counting or in your treasury. Okay, we'll have to hold it here for today. Have a wonderful day.